This webinar will begin in 1 minute. Again, this webinar will begin in 1 minute. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rotor Consulting's webinar on a balanced approach to project planning. My name is Christina Reed. I am the Assistant to the President here at Rotor Consulting and your host for today's webinar. As always, I welcome each and every one of you from around the world. In a few minutes, I will introduce you to our speaker today, Mr. Trey Rotor, but before I begin, I have a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to share with you. Now, there are 750 of you on this webinar today, and we always love your questions and comments. To the right of your screen, you should see a Q&A panel, and this is where you can write any questions, comments you may have, and since this is a global webinar, we'd love to know where you're from. So before your question or comment, if you could put your city, your country, and your question, we will include that in your question so that we can truly see how global this webinar really is. For the past couple of webinars, I've been tweeting about our webinars, and this webinar is no different. I will be tweeting and using the hashtag PROJPLAN, P-R-O-J, plan, P-L-A-N. So if you have Twitter, join me in tweeting about this event, and if you can't, follow us at Rotor Consult. Should you have any problems with this WebEx platform, you can call WebEx at any time. The event number is on your screen, but it is 796-734. Again, should you have any questions about the WebEx platform, you can't hear us, the video seems to go in and out, you can always call WebEx. Now, your PDU form that you can claim your one free PDU for this webinar and the PowerPoint presentation will be available at the end of this webinar. I will give you a link to those, and you'll be able to download them along with instructions on how to claim your one free PDU. Again, the PDU form and this PowerPoint presentation will be available at the end of this webinar. As always, this is a global webinar. I'm very happy to announce that we are being broadcast over 5 continents, 32 different countries, and that number of people that registered for this event has actually gone up. I think the last time I checked, it was around 760, 770, 780, somewhere around there. Thank you so much for joining us today. We do this for you, and thank you for your continued support. We have 2 featured courses of the month. For those of you in the Maryland area, we will be there on September 21st to do a presentation skills course at a reduced rate. And then for all of you, wherever you are, we have an online leadership course. It spans over 2 days. Both courses are 8 PDUs. We have a lot of fun, and if you enjoy these webinars, our online course is more intimate. You'll be able to actually have a live line and chat with the instructor. So we have just so much fun, so I would invite you to join us for these courses. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Trey Rotor. Mr. Rotor is a PMP and the president and founder of Rotor Consulting. Years ago, Mr. Rotor successfully managed the largest plant retooling project in the history of a major printing company, enabling the company to enter a new market and secure $100 million in revenue. In 2001, after serving as a consultant with Booz Allen Hamilton, he founded Rotor Consulting, a respected project management consulting and training firm. Mr. Rotor is recognized as a global expert in project management. He regularly speaks at global project management events, including the Project Management Institute's Global Congress, where he received once a coveted encore presentation. He is quoted in books and articles published by MSN Money, Microsoft Press, the Project Management Institute, and the Cleveland Plain Dealer, just to name a few. In 2011, the 10th anniversary of Rotor Consulting, Mr. Rotor released his best-selling book, A Sixth Sense for Project Management. In this book, Mr. Rotor details how to achieve project success by deploying a balanced approach with a particular emphasis on people. Mr. Rotor and his family reside in Cleveland, Ohio, and he is a member of the Northeast Ohio chapter of the Project Management Institute. He holds a BA in Economics from the University of Illinois and an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. So without further ado, please help me welcome Mr. Trey Rotor.
Well, Christina, thank you so much. I appreciate the kind introduction. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome to the Rotor Consulting webinars. For those of you who've been with us before, and I know from looking at the results of the questionnaire that each of you filled out when you signed up for this webinar, that there are a number of you who have been with us for 5 or more webinars. Some of you have even been with us for more than 10 webinars. So to each of you, welcome back. We hope to see you again next month. I'd like to start with a question, and the question is, are you a member of the Project Management Institute? You will see a survey open up on the right-hand side of your screen. This is a quick one. You only have 30 seconds to fill it out. Please select yes, no, but I've heard of it, or no, and I'm not familiar with the Project Management Institute. This question, along with the next question that we will ask, will help me gauge the audience and know how much time to spend on the different slides that we will go through as we talk about project planning. So this poll should be just closing out now, and we will see the results in a moment. It takes the WebEx platform a little bit of time to do the results. It looks like about 2/3 of the group is a member of the Project Management Institute. Some of you are not, but are familiar with it, and there are some joining us today who are not familiar with the Project Management Institute, which is great. Rotor Consulting is separate from the Project Management Institute. Some of the things that we're going to talk about are based on information from the Project Management Institute, however. If you're not familiar, this is a global association. It's one of the 10 largest associations in the world. There are some 350,000 plus members of PMI and more than 400,000 people who hold their main credential, which is a Project Management Professional Credential. PMI was founded 40 years ago, a little bit more than 40 years ago in 1969. There are other trade associations across the globe involved with project management as well. Now the next question for you is, are you a project management professional? That's a simple yes or no, but I've heard of it, or no, I am not familiar with it. So are you a project management professional? If you are, you will be familiar with this book here. This is the Project Management Body of Knowledge Guidebook. We are currently on version 4. This guidebook was introduced in the late 80s, so PMI had been around for almost 15 years before they introduced the first guidebook. We are going to talk about some of the things in this guidebook today. Now, like any Rotor Consulting program, we start with the Project Management Body of Knowledge Guidebook, and then we move from there into the real world and the practical application of the Project Management Body of Knowledge, which truly is you. Each of you are the Project Management Body of Knowledge. This book does the best that the authors can do to capture that. This poll has now been closed on Are You a PMP? And in a moment here, the WebEx platform will let us know the results. And I see that looks like about 75% of the people who are with us today are project management professionals, yet many of you are not. So if you are a project management professional, we will start off with some review and then go into new territory. And if you're not a project management professional, you will hear some of the basics of how the Project Management Institute thinks about planning, the topic of the day, and then we will move into new territory as well. I'm going to skip over this PMP slide since most of you are well familiar with it. For those of you who aren't, you can find this on PMI's website. We're going to start, as we always do, with stories from the front line. We have two stories for you today. The first one comes from Mr. Richard Traub. At the end of last month's webinar, I asked the question, how does your organization plan? Does your organization see planning as something that's very important, something that's unimportant? Do they say it's important but don't actually pay attention to it? How do you think about planning? And then we went to the LinkedIn group and saw what you had to say. One of the responses that we received was from Richard Trapp, and he said, we come to an agreement early in the program for all team members to understand and participate in the project plan. What you're hearing here from Richard is one of the keys to getting buy-in. People like what they create. People tend to think that their own ideas are very good ideas. So here he has successfully found a way to successfully integrate the different people from his team into the project planning process. Richard goes on to say the key is for the information in the project schedule to be the source of delay reporting and risk reporting. In other words, they're letting the schedule or the project plan do the heavy lifting for them and using that as the tool to say something's not quite right here. And here's what the schedule is telling us. If you're interested in Richard's full comments, I encourage you to go to the Rotor Consulting LinkedIn. Richard's full comments. We have a special treat today. We have a second story from the front line, and for the first time, this story will be coming to you live. I'd like to introduce to you Linky Vandermeer. Linky will be joining us live from Cape Town, South Africa. If you've never been to Cape Town, it's an absolutely beautiful town, perched on the ocean, with brilliant architecture and even more brilliant people. Linky is a project management professional and recently has been working for Microsoft. In her capacity at Microsoft, she recently led a project that won a coveted award from Microsoft, and planning was a big part of that. So today, live from her home, or perhaps her office, in fact, Linky, I'm not sure where you are residing, Linky Vandermeer from South Africa. Please join me in welcoming Linky.
To come and see my story with you today. It is really a privilege for me to be here, and I am very excited to share with you today the lessons that I've learned from a recent project. Okay. Need to open up the video here. Can you see me?
Linky, we can hear you, and we have not seen the video come through yet, so you can click on the button that says start. There you are.
There, okay.
Now we have Linky. Welcome again.
Okay, thanks very much again, Trey, for this opportunity. Right, so the story I would like to share with you today is about a 9-month project that finished earlier this year in the government sector. It's an IT project for migration from Microsoft, and we introduced 15 Microsoft technologies into that environment. Just to give you a quick background, the project team consists of 15 people, physical and virtual, because we were never at the same place at the same time. We received the Gold Star Award for the best executed project by international auditors at the end of last year, who audited us for contract compliance and project excellence. And that's the reason why on this today I'd like to share some of the best that we specifically pertain to. So after your scope agreement, we just followed the very intensive planning phase, and we had to refine the project schedule, which we actually inherited from Just move on to the next slide. Okay. So the first thing that I can share with you is that that was quite a hectic project schedule because it consisted of more than 500 lines, and I had to ensure that the project lead, people working with me on this project, take ownership of their activities. Doing that, I made sure that they verified all the activities detail and the timelines and the dependencies. We followed a very constant planning approach, always looking at 1 to 2 months ahead of time. So the takeaway is always be planning and to continuously track against your plan the progress that you're making, and to update your plan based on change requests as well as mitigation activities. I also follow consistent communication practices. I'm a very firm believer of having weekly team meetings on any project. I trust very well because it actually helps to keep your team members informed and clear to the outcome of the project. And we used to have these weekly meetings like this online, and people would call in from 6 different places. And I had to get to know all their voices so that I could know who was talking, and I was making notes and doing the minutes time. But what's good about the weekly meetings is that you can discuss the progress on the project, what's due, and risks and issues and any other relevant matters. Then it also, me as the project manager, informed about the progress on that I can do the consistent progress reporting to all the stakeholders. Next is the planning for resource management. We had to subcontract consult from 5 different partners, as we call them, or IT companies, and we actually received a complaint from the auditors who stated that we really worked together well as one team and one friend. So I would say there were 2 things that we did to help us with that, and that is that we actually picked the best people from the partner base, from previous who we knew and knew one another. And the other thing that we did is we had an onboarding process that we followed, which just means that each of the new team members who joined us throughout the project, we made sure that we gave them a thorough introduction to the background, the objectives, vision, the benefits, and obviously the deliverables that I would be responsible for, and definitely familiar with the project schedule as well. So, it's important that your team members need to be clear on their roles and responsibilities, because I will manage the person and not only the task. It's simple, but it's not easy. The other thing that I is also planning is really a team sport, and team alone is key for any plan to be executed well. So I just included some pictures there to show you how we achieve team synergy, cooperation, and trust, because I firmly also believe in team goals to have them at the beginning of the project, after major milestones, and also at the close. And you can see here from that we really follow the approach because it gives them a sense of belonging and a positive association with the project, which really makes it a positive experience for them and makes them even more committed to the successful outcome. The other thing that helped for team synergy and trust was the respect that the different consultants had for one another, and just overall being very professional in their conduct, as well as with the customer. So the gold nuggets that I would say for today that I leave with you, really for the important continuous planning, planning. So even when you're in the execution phase and the other phases of the project, never stop planning. It is really an ongoing activity, especially on the project manager side. Consistent communication practices is just as important, so communicating with your team members, all the relevant stakeholders appropriate, and the team alignment. And this you will have having good relationships with all your team members, because remember you manage the person performing the task and not only the task itself. So to conclude, I would say for approach in project planning, it's important to use your project management skills, which are more the technical side of things, but also to be that team members, so that actually respond for a successful outcome. And that's from me today. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Linky. Thank you for agreeing to join us on short notice. And in the Rotor Consulting webinars, we are constantly pushing the line in terms of our content, and we also are typically pushing the line in terms of technology. We stress our WebEx platform on a daily basis, and what we've just done there, attempting to bring you in via video and audio from South Africa, was something new for what we have done in one of our webinars. So I apologize to those of you who may have had a difficult time hearing some of what Linky had to say. We will be continuing the conversation on our LinkedIn group. Again, thanks so much, Linky, for being a part of today's webinar. Let's push on now.
Thank you, Trey, for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you. Talk now about project planning. By the way, you see the slide on your screen here. Here's how to find Linky. Some contact information for her, and also, as mentioned, the Rotor Consulting Group on LinkedIn. Linky is already a member. That's how I found out about her. Would you like to be part of one of our future global webinars? If so, I encourage you to participate in the group on LinkedIn. Stories from the front line often come from the LinkedIn group, and we at Rotor Consulting spend a lot of time monitoring what you have to say, because you are closer to what's going on in the field, and you see a lot of different fascinating things that we would love to hear about. Moving forward now, balanced approach to project planning. If you're familiar with Rotor Consulting, you know that we see successful project management as the proper deployment of a balanced approach of technical skills. Those are those technical project management skills that you learn in the Project Management Body of Knowledge Guidebook. Also of business acumen, that's your willingness and ability and knowledge to understand what your organization is trying to do. And the third leg of the stool are those sixth sense people skills. As we talk about planning today, we will talk about planning from the perspective of each of those three skills: technical, business acumen, and people skills. Going to the project management body of knowledge. Many volunteers in the field. There are 5 project management process groups. You see them here on your screen: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. For purposes of today's discussion, we will focus on the first two. Planning is its own discrete phase. However, the planning process does not begin with planning. It, in fact, begins with initiation. Many of the problems that we find in inadequate planning come from improper initiation. That's why we start there. Now, the approach that we're going to talk about today is often referred to as the waterfall approach. So if we take those same 5 process groups and show them a little bit differently, you can see now that initiating leads into planning, leads into executing, and so on. And if I draw a blue line on top of that, here is our waterfall. Contrast this to the agile approach to project management. The agile approach has become very popular in the last 10 years, starting about 8 or so years ago with the Agile Manifesto, where a group of people said, this waterfall process doesn't work for us in all cases. We'd like to try things a little bit differently. We do acknowledge right up front that there are different ways to successfully plan your project. For purposes of today's conversation, we are going to focus on this waterfall approach, where initiating leads to planning, leads to executing, and so on. This process, although it is linear in nature, in the way that it operates, does not mean that you can't come back and make some changes to the plan later on. There are ways and tools to do that. Let's focus now on the first phase, which is initiating. Now, here's what I've done. Let's go back to this prior slide. In the prior slide, you see the 5 process groups that PMI says define project management. What we're going to do now for the rest of our time together is focus just on those 2. So if you take initiating and planning, the first 2 of the project groups, and put them on one slide, here's what it looks like. Well, here's what a high-level version of it looks like. I have not included all of the processes and tools and templates that can show up under initiating or planning. I've just picked a couple of them for purposes of our conversation today. So for initiation, we'll talk about the project charter, and then for planning, we'll talk about the work breakdown structure and assigning resources and schedule to that. That will be the first section, which will be a review of the PMBOK, but then what we're going to do is we're going to change gears and we're going to say, all right, that's all well and good, but in the real world, what really happens in our projects and what can we do about it? Let's push on. Initiating. One of the main documents in the initiation phase of your project is the project charter. The project charter typically has things in it such as who are the stakeholders for this project? Who is the sponsor of my project? Who is going to be on the team? Who is going to be the project manager? How long, at a high level, how long do we think it's going to take to do this project? How much do we think it's going to cost? We are beginning the planning process right here in the charter, in initiation. However, we are not conducting the entire planning process, because the charter typically happens in early days of our project. We don't know all of the details yet, and we may not need to know all of the details yet. The charter is a document saying, we are formally launching a project here. And when we formally launch this project, here's what we think it is that we're going to try to do. Here are the high-level guidelines for this project. We are now going to engage in a process after the project is formally launched to help us figure out more details from a planning standpoint. One thing that should be included in the charter is the roles and responsibilities of the project manager. It's also, by the way, one thing that often is not included in the charters. When each of you signed up for today's webinar, you filled out a questionnaire. And one of the questions was, what are some of the challenges that you have when you are going through project planning? One of the things that I saw many times on the responses to the questions are things like, it's not really clear what my role is here, or I wish people would understand what I'm trying to do with the plan and help me work together to make the plan happen. Well, this is a problem that comes from improper initiation. because it's right here in the charter that we define what the project manager is being asked to do and what they are not being asked to do. Just within the last several weeks, I was conducting a corporate training session for one of our project management partners, and this issue came up where the project managers wanted to know, what's my role and responsibility? What is it that I have the authority to do? And we talked then about the project charter and the section in the project charter that clearly defines the authority of the project manager. So if your organization is not doing this today, I encourage you to talk right up front in the initiation phase of your projects about the authority and the roles and responsibility of the project manager. Let's make sure we're clear on that before we push forward. So that's our project charter. As we move down the waterfall, the next thing that would happen, talking at a high level here, is the creation of a work breakdown structure. Now, let's go to the project management body of knowledge and knock out a couple definitions here. First, we have moved now from the initiation phase into the planning phase. How does PMI define project planning? Those processes performed to establish the total scope of the effort, define and refine the objectives. Let me pause there and point out, we're refining the objectives. What are we refining? The charter and some of the other documents that came out of the initiation phase. So we already have some general idea of what it is we're trying to do. Now in the planning phase, we're going to build more definition around that. Continuing with the definition here from the Project Management Body of Knowledge Guidebook. By the way, all of these are version 4.0, the latest version of PMBOK, and develop the course of action required to obtain those objectives. So there's planning in a nutshell. What are we going to do? Let's make sure we're all on the same page on what it is that we're doing, and then let's put some specificity around how we're going to do that. Who's going to do it? How much is it going to cost to get it done? How much time is it going to take for us to do it? What are the risks associated with getting it done? That is project planning. One of the main tools that we use, indeed what some people argue is the heart of project management, is the work breakdown structure. Here's another definition for you from the Project Management Body of Knowledge. A work breakdown structure is a deliverable-oriented, hierarchical decomposition of work to be executed by the project team to accomplish the project objectives and create the required deliverables. It organizes and defines the total scope of the project. Whew. Well, if you're like me and find some of the PMBOK definitions a little bit hard to track, let's boil that down into more simple language. Here's what a work breakdown structure is. It's taking the work that needs to be done and breaking it down into progressively more detailed tasks. That's really what we're doing with the work breakdown structure, and here's what it might look like. Take a look at that box at the top there. That's where you fill in what you're doing. I am building a new kitchen. I am implementing a new software system. I am merging the two largest divisions of my organization. That's the top box. In the next layer down, we break that into subcomponents. And then each of those subcomponents get broken down into further subcomponents, and so on. When do we know when to stop? How do you know how much detail is too much detail? I have talked to more project managers who say, you know what? I took the work breakdown structure, I put it into Microsoft Project, we broke it down into a lot of detail, and the thing collapsed of its own weight. It was so complicated, it was so hard to follow, we did not end up using it. So how do we know when we're planning our project how much detail is too much detail? PMBOK version 3 gave us some guidance on this. PMBOK version 3 said that the bottom level of your work breakdown structure, which is called a work package, you see at the bottom of the screen here, the work package, the bottom level of your work breakdown structure, according to PMBOK version 3, the old version, should not be more than 80 hours. And there's your answer. Well, I was never comfortable with the 80 hours. I thought to myself, what's so magic about 80 hours? Sure, it's 2 weeks of work for someone who's working 40 hours a week. I get that, but what if I have a work package that's 82 hours? Have I violated some rule of project management? Is my project going to fail because I have work packages that are 82 hours instead of 80 hours? Fortunately, the good news is that PMBOK version 4, the current version that we are in, dropped that language. There no longer is a reference to a targeted number of hours for those work packages. Indeed, what we found is that some projects, for example, let's say you're building an airliner. If you brought all of that down to 80 hours, the level of detail and complexity of that project plan became absolutely mind-numbing and unusable. The guidance now is to use your judgment. This takes us firmly into the land of a sixth sense for project management. For those of you familiar with the 6 disciplines of a sixth sense for project management, disciplines such as awareness and whole body decisions and adaptability now become guiding lights for us to figure out how much detail to have in our work breakdown structure. One final thought here before we push on. In terms of general guidelines for how much detail, ideally, you want the work packages in your work breakdown structure to be assignable to an individual or a group or a team. One of the questions I got recently was the following. All right, my work breakdown structure on the manufacturing side breaks it down to something that needs to go out to our production floor to be put on a piece of equipment and machined. I don't know the name of the operator of that equipment who will be running it that day. It could be any one of 6 people. So do I need a name on my work breakdown structure? No, you don't need a name. But you need to define the resource as those personnel on your plant floor. So you decide, is it a team, is it a resource in general terms, or is it a specific name? But try to, if at all possible, have it be one party or group that you're assigning this to. Also, it needs to be trackable. The best guidance I can give you on a work breakdown structure is put it together in the way that you think about your project. As you think about this second level of boxes, right beneath the top box, look at that second level of boxes. Think about those in terms of how you're going to divvy up the work to be done. If you're going to divvy it up by functional area, maybe that next level of your work breakdown structure should be by functional area. If you're going to divvy it up by vendor, perhaps you want to put vendor columns into the work breakdown structure. This makes it a much more usable tool and realistic tool for you in your particular project situation. Let's keep going down the waterfall now. We've built our work breakdown structure. The next thing to do is to build out the plan by putting resources against this. What are project resources? Back to the PMBOK. Skilled human resources, skip through what's in the parentheses, equipment, services, supplies, commodities, materials, budgets, or funds. So any sort of material or money or people that you need to do your project, those are your project resources. Here is another area that I heard a lot of comments on in terms of the challenges that we find in project planning. We find that it's very difficult at times to get the resources that we need to successfully complete our projects. In particular, I hear a lot about human resources, and that's not surprising. What's happening overall? Organizations are asking fewer people to do more work. As processes become streamlined, as budgets become tighter, there are fewer people doing more things. And what that means is that those people who we want to be as resources on our project are also likely to be asked to be resources on many other projects as well. And the better they are, the more effective they are at being a team member, the more likely they are going to get asked to be on all different kinds of projects. This is a real challenge that I hear from you in the field dealing with projects every day. The project schedule are the planned dates for performing scheduled activities and milestones. Now, in PMBOK language, a milestone is a high-level deliverable for a project, and the activities are beneath the milestones. So a schedule is taking all of this information, boiling it up into how long is it going to take to get this thing done, how many people do I need, how much is it going to cost, and so on. This is project planning as defined by the project management body of knowledge. Ideally, where do you assign those resources? Down at the work package level. Ideally, you go down to those work packages, and for each one, you say, how much time is this going to take? Who's the resource to do it? What's the budget I need to get this done? And it all rolls up. And then we see for each column within the work breakdown structure, the expected time and the expected cost, and we see overall for the project. That's ideally. Now, let's talk about the real world. I have seen people define their resources at higher levels in the work breakdown structure. Some organizations feel really good about defining it at the second level of the work breakdown structure. You decide what makes sense for you. How much detail do you need for your project? How much detail do you need to report out to the key parties compared to how much detail can you manage? Realistically, how many hours do you have in the day to keep all of this updated and current and relevant? That's the trade-off that we make when we talk about how much detail to put into a project plan. So there we go. That's the end of the textbook. We've created our charter, we've created a work breakdown structure, we've assigned resources to it, and we have a plan. We come out of this with our project plan, and now we're ready to roll. That's the textbook answer. Does it work? Sometimes. Does it work all the time? No. I heard that from you in your responses. So what do we do? Why do we even plan? Well, let's talk about it. You saw the Himbach definition of planning. Here's a different definition of project planning from General Eisenhower. Plans are worthless. But planning is everything. Really? What he means is that the plan in and of itself is of limited value because things change. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. The enemy has their plans too. And when they deploy their plan, it might adjust what's going on in yours. People don't come in. People get sick. There's fires at vendor plants. All sorts of reality happens, which I have heard directly from some influential people in organizations lead them to say, why plan? Why even do this? Because things are going to change. It's not going to be very useful. Well, the first answer to why plan is the second part of General Eisenhower's quote. Planning is everything. Going through the process of thinking about what you need to do to make this project successful is exceptionally helpful. Seeing all the moving pieces, how they relate to each other, how they integrate with each other or not, how much you think they're going to cost, how many resources you think you're going to need, all of this teaches us real lessons as we are doing it. So the process of planning in and of itself is going to merit real benefits for you in your project environment. Let's talk about planning in the real world. Well, what if you don't do it? Do you remember this game, this 8-ball game that was out there some years ago where you'd ask the 8-ball a question like, what is the weather going to be like tomorrow? And then you'd shake it, and up into the clear window, there'd be a little triangle that would have some sort of answer on it, like ask me again, or check the guidebook from whatever. Now, this 8-ball is a random way of coming up with things. Well, if we don't plan at all, if you take the approach of, hey, plans aren't perfect, plans are useless, so why even do it? Well, everything you do in your project then is going to be random, and you're not going to know what's going on. That's the 8-ball approach. Now, what do we expect? What do many people expect of the plans? They think it's going to be the crystal ball. Why are project managers the only people who are expected to accurately predict the future? Yeah, I can tell you exactly how long this is going to take, and how many resources I'm going to need, and I can predict all of the costs for the next year or two, well, that's just unrealistic. So plans are not a crystal ball, nor should we think about them as a crystal ball, nor should we lead anyone in our organizations to believe that we have put forth a crystal ball. Instead, a plan is like the attitude indicator on an airplane. If any of you are pilots, you will recognize this as an attitude indicator. You have the blue sky on the top, you have the ground represented by the color of brown on the bottom, and in the middle there are two red wings and a little red triangle pointing up representing your airplane. That airplane is your project. The blue sky and the ground are what's happening to your project right now, what it's doing. In this current picture, we're flying straight and level. The wings are level, we're not gaining altitude, we're not losing altitude, we're flying straight along. So we have the reality of our project symbolized by the red airplane crashed against what's going on outside, which is the horizon, and here we see things are going well. Now what if you don't have that plan? What if you don't have the plan? Would you know if your plane was in a banking turn and declining? Now, if you were literally in an airplane, you would not know if you're in a turn because the center of gravity always goes down through the middle of the plane. And when you're in balanced flight, which you hopefully always are, coordinated balanced flight in a commercial airliner, the center of gravity goes through the middle of the plane. That's why you can keep your drink on the tray, and when the plane turns left and right, nothing slides off. The only way you might know is by feeling a little bit extra G-force pushing you down into the seat. Well, same thing in our project. If you don't have the plan, you might be turning or climbing. You're not going to know how you're doing. In fact, if you look at an attitude indicator like this, now this tells you you're in a steep bank to the left and you're going down. If you don't have the attitude indicator in the plane, you're not likely to know that. If you don't have a project plan in your project, you're also not likely to know this. What does good look like? We don't know without that plan. Here's some assumptions that are embedded in the PMI process. We assume that the work breakdown structure is a comprehensive look at our project, that we have the scope right, that we have the specifications right, that we know everything up front. That's one of the big challenges of the waterfall process. That's one of the big reasons why Agile has become so important. In the waterfall process, we think we know everything up front. And if we don't, we really put pressure on people to figure it out up front. You just tell me what you want to have happen, and I'll go do it. In the real world, it doesn't always work that way. Things change, things evolve, a new competitor enters the market, the economic situation changes, all of these things influence our project. We also make assumptions in regard to resources. The people you selected, we assume, are going to be available, and they're going to be able to do the requested work. From a scheduling standpoint, we assume we know all the dependencies, that all these things are going to work the way they are, and clearly in the real world, these things don't happen. So what can we do? Well, there's 5 principles that we can deploy to have a balanced approach to project planning. The first one, when you're creating the plan, be clear with the team that one of the reasons why you're doing this is to create a better understanding of the key activities and their interdependencies. Going back to General Eisenhower's quote, embrace the fact that this planning process may not give us, in fact, almost certainly will not give us the perfect forecast of how long it'll take, how much it'll cost. However, what it will do is it will help all of us better understand the magnitude of the work before us. Principle number 2. Use the plan to identify the sensitivity to various risks. I used the example earlier of a fire at one of your vendors. Well, how do you know how big of a problem that's going to be for you? If that vendor is providing a part that's along your critical path, then that's a big problem for you because any delay from that part coming to you means a delay in your project. On the other hand, if that vendor is not on the critical path and you in fact have a month of cushion, between when that part comes and when it needs to be used, now this is less of a concern for you. So if you are in an environment where everything is a crisis, every change to the project plan is a big deal, perhaps part of your answer is to have a more sophisticated plan that helps you determine, of all the different things that happen on a daily basis in our projects, which one should I care the most about, which one should I spend most of my time fixing, and which ones can I say, that's too bad, but it's really not a big deal to my project, so I'm not going to waste a lot of gunpowder focusing on this particular issue. Principle number 3, adjust the plan to reality on a regular basis. Things change. We know that. The plan should change too. Now, what is a regular basis? Is it all the time? Is it real time? Well, for most project environments, the answer is probably going to be no. Adjusting it all the time feels like a little bit too much. Maybe it's daily, maybe it's weekly. For one of our clients, it's monthly. They have monthly report outs. They just want to know once a month where they're at with regard to that project for an overall reporting standpoint, but the project manager will update some more things on a daily and weekly basis. You decide for your organization what a regular basis is, but be sure to update the plan on that timeline. Principle number 4. Now we're getting into business acumen as we work our way around the balanced approach. We talked about some of those technical skills up front, the charter, the work breakdown structure, and so on. Business acumen is about knowing the end game for our project. Why are we doing this? Why should other people in the organization care about this project? If you're fighting for resources, principle number 4 is going to help you get those resources. If you are able to articulate to the executives in your organization and to the would-be members of your team why it's so important, why it's so critical, why what they're doing is going to be part of the future of this organization, then you're on your way towards business acumen. And by the way, when the inevitable changes happen, when you look at the project plan and all of a sudden realize, wow, this didn't work out at all the way I thought it would, what should I do now? Look at the end game. Ask yourself, what's the point of this project? Why are we doing this? And now, how can I find a different path to make it happen? Because the first path that I had so well and meticulously documented turned out not to work. Principle number 5, moving our way around the balanced approach. Don't forget about the 6 disciplines of a 6th sense of project management. We don't have the time to do it today. I encourage you, though, to think about each of these 6 disciplines, starting with awareness, and you're going to find how important and, in fact, critical these skills can be to the project planning process. All of the interpersonal things that are going on, the culture, the politics, the emotion, these things influence our plans, and your ability to keep your cool and manage that is going to be critical. All right, so what if things still don't go according to plan? Let's address that question from each of the 3 areas of the balanced approach, starting with technical skills. There's a couple tools that we learned, if you're a project management professional, on how to deal with it. One is crashing the schedule. Crashing the schedule is adding in more resources. Now, this term can be used in a variety of different ways, but according to the PMBOK, the technical definition of crashing is something where additional resources will shorten the duration. So this is bringing in an outside vendor. This is deploying other people from your organization to help out. In order to crash the schedule, however, you need to have a milestone or an activity that will be expedited by additional resources. Going back to that example of the fire in the plant, additional resources might not help you get that part any sooner. You can also shift select activities from series to parallel. So when you put the plan together, you may have said we need to do A, then B, then C. If the schedule gets tight, you can start doing some things in parallel. But what this is likely to do is increase your risk. You might say, we're going to start building the wing before the final design is in for the wheel compartment. Now that may feel very uncomfortable, and it's going to increase your risk because you might have to change the wing a little bit, when that design comes in, and it could also increase your cost as you rebuild the wing. It could even make things take longer, but nonetheless, in the real world, this is one of the trade-offs that we have to make, and sometimes we as project managers need to do things that ideally would be done in series in parallel to make our project happen. How about from a business acumen standpoint? Going back to principle number 4, keep your eye on the end game. When things get tough, when things start going the way you don't want them to or didn't expect them to, keep your eye on the goal, on the mission at hand, and work with your team and your executive sponsor and your stakeholders to figure out a way to make it happen. Also, take responsibility. Don't be the person who says, I don't know what's going on, nothing I can do about it. Be the person who says, I am going to figure this out, I'm going to take charge of this situation, I'm going to take responsibility for finding the answer. How about from a people skills standpoint? The first and most fundamental thing is to keep your cool. When things start getting hot in the project environment, we need to keep our cool. How can you do that? Quite simply, breathe. Take several deep breaths, and what that will do is keep the oxygen flowing to the thinking part of your brain. Don't trivialize this. Elite soldiers, elite athletes, people at the top of their game learn sophisticated breathing techniques. Why don't we introduce them now to the world of project management? We're under pressure too. We have a lot of things that happen that we need to react very quickly to. Keep breathing and always remain confident. Be seen as the person who is going to deliver results on this project. If all else fails, go back to discipline number 6 of a 6-sensor project management, and that is persistence, in particular, patient persistence. People change on their own schedules. We have about 4 minutes left in this webinar. I'm going to pause here for questions and comments. Perhaps some have come through as we have been talking. I think we have time for just 1 or 2 questions or comments, and then we'll go into our closing thoughts. By the way, for the comments that we don't get to in the webinar, we will take them to our LinkedIn group, and I encourage you to look at the Rotor Consulting LinkedIn group to be part of those. Christina, do we have, yes, all right.
I feel like I've been sprinting back and forth between Q&A and chat and all that fun stuff. Vivian from Canton, Massachusetts, do you see any value in having multiple project schedules based on deliverables or teams, and having one master plan with only milestones and managing the master plan to those milestones?
Yes, thank you, Vivian. So the question is, my interpretation of the question is, do you manage your project plan separately or together? And the answer, regrettably, because it's not a simple answer, is it depends. In some cases, I've seen organizations build everything together into a master plan and then need that to get the best answers. The downside is it creates a lot of complexity. And when you build everything together and roll it up into one plan, it can create a very difficult software setup environment and also a maintenance environment where someone changes something on this plan over here and then it changes something all the way back. Last week we had training for one of our clients, and I brought in an expert on Microsoft Project. In fact, a woman who wrote a book published by Microsoft Press, a number of books on the use of Microsoft Project, and she said to us, sometimes I go into my project plan and something's changed and I don't know why. So I need to go back and reinvent what happened, and over time I'll see, oh, this is what caused it to change. That made the rest of us feel better, that even the experts on Microsoft Project have things change. So the more you roll into that plan, whatever software you're using, one little thing could have a domino effect and it becomes more complex to troubleshoot that. Great question. Let's take one more here.
Oh, you're catching me off guard. Let's see. Okay. Ahmed asks, hold on, let me get this. Sorry. Ahmed asks, what does current research tell us on how many projects one person can manage before PM effectiveness falls off?
Interesting question. I have not seen a formal research project on that. If any of you have, please let us know. Send us a note here on chat or pop it up there in the LinkedIn group. I haven't seen it, so my answer is going to be more anecdotal. The number that I commonly hear is 4 to 6. 4 to 6 projects. More than that, it starts feeling like too much, and less than that, it starts feeling like there's limited capacity. However, in the real world, it really depends. When I was managing that printing company project some 12 or 14 years ago, that was my only project. Said differently, that was my main project. I had some other things I was involved with, but I wasn't really project managing them. In other cases, I've heard of people managing 10 or 12 projects effectively at the same time. So it depends on your organization and what the demands are on you. And again, if anyone has seen formal research on this, I'd sure love to see that and share it with everyone who's with us today. Closing things out, join us on social media if you'd like to be a part of this continuing conversation. Also, if you'd like to be aware of future webinars, we post them to our various social media sites. And if you happen to be in one of the cities on the map here, we will be coming to you in the next 6 to 8 weeks. You can see we'll be in the Northeast, Midwest, and also in the West. We'd love to see you at one of the in-person programs that we will be hosting. Well, let's close things out here. I'm going to hand off back to Christina Reed since we're at the top of the hour, and she will share with you how to claim the PDUs for this form. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next month.
Thank you very much, Trey, and thank you, Linky, as well. I have received so many comments from Q&A and chat. All of you guys have really enjoyed it. I have enjoyed tweeting, so if you are on Twitter, like I said, please join us. The majority of these questions that you asked will be on LinkedIn. For those of you who want to claim your one free PDU, the link is on the screen. It is www.rotorconsulting.com/post, P-O-S-T, webinar.php. If you didn't get that or you can't see the screen, do not worry. In about 15 to 20 minutes, you'll receive an email from WebEx with all this information. We thank you so much for joining us from Rotor Consulting in Cleveland, Ohio. We wish you a great day, and we look forward to seeing you next month for our webinar entitled The Big Dig, Managing Risk and Complexity in Mega Projects. Thanks so much. Bye.